So we're talking here about a little bit about the tools again, and so I just mentioned that you can, put text on a path and different things like that. So again, you can move things around, you know, once you type something on a path. Going through some of these other tool menus, tool choices, you can draw a line. If you hold the shift key down, you can draw a really straight line. Notice over here, I forgot to mention this, which is that you have your fill and you have your line on any element. So obviously a line will only have a line, whereas an element with a fill and a line will have an option to have a fill. In this case, the slash means there's no line. So if I were to click on that, it'll come to the forward. I can then add a line to that. I can make a blue line around that brown box. Now it's hard to see because it's kind of small, but I can change the stroke. So if I go to my stroke, which is over here, pull it out, I can make my stroke much bigger and you'll be able to see it much more clearly. So it's a 10-point stroke. So your strokes are all in points. It's like your font is all in points, right? Measurements are in inches. And if you want to see the ruler measurements, you can go to View, Rulers, Show Rulers, or Command R. And you'll see how the dimensions are up here. So it's 8.5 by 11 letter size. So you can see the 0 to 8.5 and 0 all the way down to 11. That's your file size. I'll show you how to play with the artboards a little bit later in another tutorial. So here's my 10-point outline. So I can click on it and I can see the fill is brown and the outline is blue. I can change that if I click on the fill. I can do it up here too. So you can choose your stroke up here, and you can make the stroke a darker color. You can change the inside fill to make it whatever you want, and you can do it on any element that that has a that's closed. So it means that you can change the point size. So you can really start playing around with different elements on a page. I would stray away from adding strokes on fonts like that. You really don't want to do that. That's not a good sort of design practice, because what happens when you start doing that, you start really messing around with the font. So never, ever do what I just did. Ever. I say ever. Don't ever do that. If you're ever putting an outline on a font, I'll show you how to do that when we talk about typography. But you really want to never really mess up the beauty of the typography by adding outlines to it. Just really not a good design practice. Sorry, I showed you that. So you have lines. You can create different kinds of lines. You can create an arc. Again, if you hold the shift key down, you get these at various angles, and you can add. Once you add a stroke, you can then put a weight on it. Say 6, and then you can change the color of that arc. Similarly, you can have spiral tools in here. You can make different, and you can go ahead, you can call these to your heart's content. So you have, we went through some of these already. The cool thing about, if you're creating a circle and you want a perfect circle, you hold the shift key down, you get a perfect circle. You take your hand off the shift key and you get an oval on the lips. So however you want to, but the shift key is beautiful because you can create a rectangle and you can make it a square by holding on the shift key. It'd be a perfect square. Right? You take your hand off the shift key and then you can make a rectangle to any height and length that you want, and then you can change the color. Okay, so you have the flare tool, the star, and if you hit this little arrow right here, you can keep these up however you want, and hit the little X, it goes away. The eraser tool, the paintbrush. I rarely use the paintbrush, but sometimes I have to use it. The cool thing about any one of these elements in Illustrator is once you create a line, you can then add points to that line, as I showed you earlier. And then you can manipulate any of these lines that you want. So you don't have to be stuck with whatever Illustrator originally drew. You have these little anchors here and these little handles that you can play with. And these little handles, and it takes a lot of practice, I should say a lot of practice, getting accustomed to these handles. And when we do our tracing, I'll show you how to really play around with these a little bit more. But I'm not holding down any keys. I'm just clicking on every So I can move these manually, move the anchors, but the handles, you have to hold on the edges of the handles, and then you can manipulate those lines. So if I hold on this one, it's going to go in, and I'm pushing it to the left. You'll get accustomed to it once you start playing with it. You can pull it, and we can make them shorter. So there's a plethora of different things you can do in Illustrator with the lines and the points and moving them around. It's a lot of fun, honestly, because you have a lot of control based on of course your artistic skills and your practice. You'll be able to do that. Now here's a good thing: we have an outline here that's not closed, and if I filled it, it'll fill. But you see how you have that extra space there, and I may want to close that. So I can then take this the pen tool, and I can click on this element right here, and click on that element right there, on the end point, and it'll close it. And now you will have a closed object. Even though I started off with an object that was not closed, I have the ability to use the pen tool to go from one end to the next. So you have to have two endpoints to close it. You could also join it as well, using the object join path join, and it'll join 2 points. So you have, as I mentioned, a lot of these elements. If you double click on them, it'll give you. So the square tool, if you click once on a rectangle, you could actually key in. So let me go back a little bit. So let's say you wanted to create a rectangle. It was 2 inches by 2 inches. All I have to do is click here, and you can just type in 2, tab 2, and you'll get a perfect 2 inch by 2 inch square. I could have changed it up here too. Under the shape menu on the top, I could type it in up as well. So if it was 4 by 4, I can then go and tab 4 by 4, enter, and it'll automatically be 4 by 4. So shape, and 1 by 1, it'll be 1 by 1. So you have a lot of control, but even if I want to manually do it, I can manually do it. And it's showing me how big it is at this little corner. It's showing me, but it's easier just to go up there in the shape tool. Or if you know the original, do it from the beginning. You have your pencil tool. So if you want to draw much smaller lines, you can go in again, and you can add, make that line a different color. So the same format for each element, is pretty much the same in the sense of, color, outline, fill, moving it around, having the ability to go in and manipulate points. So they're all, if you can move it around. And it takes some getting used to when you trying to move something and you kind of click on it. You have these handles as opposed to just wanting to move it, right? You just want to click on it and just move it at this point with the selection tool. I've never really used the eraser tool that much, I'll be honest with you, but sometimes the scissors tool is really a good tool to use. Sometimes you have an object and you want to always select the object first, and let's say you want to to cut, let's say you want a special way that you want to delete some points on this square. I can use the scissors tool to go right on top of that line and just click on that. It'll create a point, and let's say I want to come over here and get rid of that there. What it just did was I just cut, and you can kind of see a faint line. In order to get rid of that, if I click back out here on the selection tool, I now have two elements. I now have where I've cut away, so it's actually moved away from there. So sometimes the scissors tool could be really, really effective, because let's say you want to create a semicircle, for instance. So I'm going to delete this one. Let's say you want to create a semicircle, and you want to just create that circle with a line at the bottom. I have these two natural points in the middle. So I can use my scissors tool. Notice it's still selected. You can still kind of see it. Let me make it yellow, so it's probably easier to see it that way. And I just have to click on that point. It highlights it. So I'll click on it once. Fear not, it shows you those little angles. And I'll come over here and click it again. That's fine. I'll click away with the selection tool, and now I have two different elements, two different semicircles. So I can move this one away, and now I have, but I want to close that point, so I'm going to use my pen tool, and I'm going to click. If you hold the shift key with the pen tool, it's going to give you a perfect line. If I don't, if I hold the shift key, it's always going to be a perfect line, either horizontal or vertical, 90 degrees. If I take my hand off the shift key, I can move that point any way I want. This time I just want it to be a perfect line, so I'm going to go over here, click on that, and it fills in the exact same width of the stroke, of the weight of that stroke. So I have now a closed element, and I can do whatever I want on the inside. Right? So you can start off with something and use a scissors tool to create something else. You have your rotation tool, your basic rotation tool. If you click on any element and then you hit the rotation tool, you can rotate it any which way you want. If I hold the shift key down, again, I'm going to rotate it, on 45-degree angles. Okay, so sometimes you want to free rotate something, you want it to be upside down or whatever. If you hold the shift key down and get that perfect 180, I could shift it this way, right? So I can move it around the same way. I could shift it again. I don't have to always use this rotation tool. I could also click on the edges of the corners and move them around like that as well. Okay, I'm going to go back where I was, and if I want to do it kind of fast, I could double click on that rotation tool. It'll give me an angle, and I can just say, oh, I want it to be 180 degrees. It's going to flip it automatically for me. So Illustrator, once you learn these little shortcuts and how fast you can do it, it's really, really quick. The scale tool, so I have the reflect tool. So if I want to reflect something, I can reflect it on an angle, right, the same way. So I can reflect it. It'll reflect automatically the way it was on that 180 degrees. So if I want to reflect it 90 degrees, it's not going to do that way. Horizontal. Okay, so you can key in things, or you can manually do it. Your scale tool is a tool that if you click on it, you can scale any object down proportionately. Right, I like to just double click on it and tell it what to do. So I want to scale something down uniformly 100 to 50% of what it originally is, and then always want to click the scale the strokes and effects the same width. So when it goes 50% down, it automatically scales with the entire image. Okay, so you have the scale tool, the share tool. Sometimes you want to share something. Again, if you hold the shift key down and you share, you're going to have, it's going to stay on that top line. You can share it right or left. And then you have the reshape tool. You probably is not going to use that much. You also have so you can use this tool to scale up sort of manually as well. You can scale the images manually. You could also do these with obviously by scaling. You could also scale it with the selection tool as well. Some of the other things that Illustrator is really known for, big time, is using the graphs. So you can have like a pie chart. You can create a box, and you can have like 45%, 55%, and you can create automatic pie chart, and then you can go in and color that pie chart, to any which way you want to do, right? And then you could even you can go to effects. Let's see, I have to click away from this. So you can create an effect, a 3D effect, for instance, with a pie chart, and you can kind of scale it and change the depth of it. And you can have a three-dimensional pie chart. You can also have different kind of columns. So you can have I'm going to get rid of some of these. So if you wanted to have, a graph, and you're punching in some numbers here, you can create graphs as well very, very easily in Illustrator. And we'll go over these in more detail. These are some of the tools that you're going to be using pretty much in the program, and we'll be going over a few more as well.